Good afternoon, preppers. Welcome to Goshen Prepping. Of course, we want to stockpile things that we like, things that are tasty, things that will actually do well for us, especially when we're talking about inexpensive items. But on that note, there are 3 things you may want to seriously consider not stockpiling. I'm not saying no. I have some of these items too, but they may not be the best things for you. Let's go through them. 3 things you may not want to stockpile. Number 1, rice. I have lots of rice. It's inexpensive. It's 50 pounds for 15 or 20 bucks. And it really supplements food very well. However, there are some things that people adamantly will not stockpile rice. And I understand this, even though I'll still do it, and I'm sure you might too. A couple things like number 1, I don't know if you know, but rice actually has some arsenic in it. That's not good. I mean, obviously, you look at people who, literally in Asia, who eat rice their entire life, and they're not dying from arsenic poisoning. So how much is it really hindering you? Probably not a whole lot. But I will say one of the biggest problems with rice is it requires so much heat to prepare. And if you're trying to actually stockpile rice for when crap hits the fan, you can even still pre-soak that rice, but you're going to actually have to put it into heat, quite a bit of heat, mind you, to get it to the point where it's edible as far as for humans go. So that's something to keep in mind. Again, I'm not saying don't do it. But the third thing too, and here's why I lean away from rice, is because it is literally just, practically speaking, empty carbs. It does have some proteins, very little amount of proteins, but it could almost be classified, if you're talking about food-wise, almost as junk food. I mean, again, it really goes great with putting it with something. You know, you actually open up a can of tuna, well, have some rice with it. You want to have some beans, have some rice with it. Probably with some Cholula sauce too, you know what I'm saying? But either way, rice, I can see why it could be a really good storage to have. We do a lot of it. But you may want to second guess actually putting a lot of rice into your stockpiles, because there's so many things about rice that makes it, I don't know, maybe it's not the best thing to have. Number 2, pasta. Pasta also, especially if you don't have some of the multi-grain pasta, which is better for you. I still wouldn't classify it as good for you by any means. Pasta, practically speaking, is mostly empty calories as well. It does have proteins in it at least. But at least with rice, even though it doesn't have much proteins, it's super cheap, and you simply throw it in some bottles and store it, you'll be good to go. Now with pasta, you must have an oxygen absorber and a Mylar bag if you actually want to store it long term. And then also, like rice too, pasta, you're going to need to put some heat into it as well. Just munching on raw pasta noodles, I mean, maybe I don't know, is not the easiest way to actually try to survive the apocalypse. Number 3, dried beans. Now, I save this one for last because this is going to be debatable. I'm definitely not trying to stir a little fight here with people, but dried beans themselves are actually really good for you. Pretty high in proteins. In fact, if you complement with rice, it actually has all the essential amino acids you need. And it's very tasty too. There's a wide variety of them. So I'm not really discounting beans per se. I'm discounting dried beans, because if you actually have like a can of beans, it'll last indefinitely. You can watch some of my other videos we talk about that. After 10 years, it may be kind of like mushy and watery. Maybe not the tastiest thing. It'll probably not be too bad, but it's still perfectly edible and it's safe to eat. Dried beans, however, in that situation, you understand the reason I'm saying you might want to have second thoughts about dried beans. It's the same thing. It requires so much heat to get them prepared. Go ahead and pre-soak them like everything else, but we're not talking about using your Instapot. We're not talking about using your stove. We're talking about, perhaps in this situation, crap hits the fan, not having a real good heat source except for some type of camping stove outside. And we're not talking about with propane either. We're talking about using probably wood. So having beans for a long-term solution, dried beans anyways, may not be the best option. So there's 3 things. And again, I'm not saying no. I'm not saying you shouldn't get these at all. I have all 3 of these stockpiled. But you definitely want to make sure that you think twice about this and think about what you have and try to do this more smartly and actually possibly go in other directions like canned food. I always try to say canned food's the best thing. What would you add to the list? What is something that you think is the worst thing to stockpile and therefore you never would? I'd like to hear about it in the comments below. Thank you for watching.